He was born a vassal prince in a forgotten corner of the ancient world. A man who ruled nothing, commanded nothing, and was expected to spend his entire life bowing to the empire that owned him. Instead, he built the largest empire the world had ever seen. Not through massacre, not through terror, but through something far more dangerous, a combination of military genius, political cunning, and a philosophy of power that no ruler before him had ever dared to use. His name was Cyrus. And in the span of a single lifetime, he didn't just conquer the ancient world. He rewrote the rules of how power itself was supposed to work. But here's what makes this story truly remarkable. The people he conquered didn't just accept him. They welcomed him. They celebrated him. Some even called him a god. How does a man rise from obscurity to rule half the known world and still be remembered as one of history's most beloved conquerors? That is the story we're about to tell. To understand what Cyrus meant to the ancient world, you first have to understand what that world looked like before he arrived. The 6th century BC was not a gentle era. The ancient Near East was carved up between brutal empires that ruled through fear, destruction, and forced displacement. When a king conquered a city, he didn't negotiate. He burned it, enslaved its people, and erased its culture. The Assyrian Empire had perfected this model for centuries: mass deportations, psychological terror, cities reduced to rubble as warnings to anyone who dared resist. And though Assyria had recently collapsed, the empires that rose in its place were no different in temperament. To the northeast sat the Median Empire, a powerful coalition of Iranian tribes that had helped bring Assyria down. To the west, the kingdom of Lydia controlled vast wealth and trade routes. And to the south, in the ancient river valleys of Mesopotamia, Babylon stood as the greatest city on earth, magnificent, wealthy, and utterly convinced of its own invincibility. This was the world in 600 BC, a world of giants, a world where small kingdoms existed only at the pleasure of larger ones. And somewhere in the foothills of southern Iran, in a small region called Anshan, a boy was growing up who would shatter all of it. The details of Cyrus's early life are wrapped in legend, and separating myth from history requires care. What we know with confidence is this: Cyrus was born around 600 BC, the son of Cambyses I, a Persian king who ruled Anshan as a subject territory under Median authority. From birth, Cyrus was a prince of a kingdom that was itself owned by a larger kingdom. Persia paid tribute to the Medes. Persian kings answered to Median overlords. The entire region was, politically speaking, a footnote. Ancient sources, including the Greek historian Herodotus, recorded stories of Cyrus's birth being accompanied by prophecies so alarming that the Median king allegedly tried to have him killed as an infant. Whether literally true or not, these stories reveal something important. Even in antiquity, people understood that Cyrus represented something unprecedented. His rise felt, to those who witnessed it, like something that wasn't supposed to happen. What we do know is that Cyrus grew up intimately familiar with both Persian and Median culture. He understood how the empire that controlled him thought, how it administered its territories, and crucially, where its weaknesses were. That knowledge would soon prove devastating. By around 553 BC, Cyrus had inherited the throne of Anshan from his father. He was now king, but king of a vassal state, still obligated to the Median Empire and its ruler, Astyages. What happened next is one of the most dramatic political reversals in ancient history. Cyrus rebelled. On paper, this was suicide. The Medes were a major power. Cyrus commanded a relatively small Persian force. Every logical calculation said this should have ended quickly. Another crushed uprising, another executed prince, another footnote in history. But Cyrus had something Astyages didn't: the loyalty of people who actually wanted to follow him. The Median military, it turned out, was deeply unhappy with Astyages. Ancient sources record that Median generals, rather than fighting Cyrus, defected to him mid-campaign. The army sent to crush the rebellion instead handed its commanders over to the man they had been ordered to destroy. By 550 BC, Astyages was captured. The Median Empire fell, not primarily through bloodshed, but through the collapse of its own internal loyalty. Cyrus absorbed Median territory, integrated Median soldiers and administrators into his own forces, and declared the birth of something new. The Achaemenid Persian Empire had arrived, and Cyrus was just getting started. If you enjoy documentaries like this one, subscribe to The Knowledge Relic. We cover the darkest, most fascinating corners of human history. What Cyrus did after defeating the Medes was just as significant as the victory itself, and it revealed something fundamental about how he thought. Where other conquerors destroyed what they captured, Cyrus preserved it. He kept Median administrators in their posts. He honored Median customs. He made the defeated empire feel less like a conquest and more like a merger. The Medes were not humiliated. They were incorporated. This was not weakness. It was strategy of the highest order. By treating conquered peoples with respect, Cyrus created something no empire had managed before: a multi-ethnic, multi-religious state, where loyalty was built not on terror, but on the calculated understanding that life under Cyrus was genuinely better than life under whoever came before. The Persian Empire that emerged from his campaigns was, by ancient standards, extraordinarily tolerant. Cyrus permitted local governance. He allowed conquered peoples to keep their religions, their languages, their traditions. In exchange, they paid taxes, provided soldiers, and pledged loyalty to the throne. It was a model of empire that was centuries ahead of its time. But the empire was still small. Two enormous powers remained, one of them the richest kingdom in the Western world, and Cyrus had already set his sights on it. To the west of Persia lay the kingdom of Lydia, ruled by a man named Croesus, so legendarily wealthy that his name became a byword for riches that has survived to this day. We still say, "rich as Croesus." Croesus had watched Cyrus absorb the Median Empire with alarm. Seeing the Persians as a growing threat, he consulted the famous oracle at Delphi, the most trusted prophetic institution in the ancient world, to ask whether he should attack Cyrus first. The oracle's reply was famously ambiguous. If Croesus crossed the river Halys and attacked Persia, a great empire would be destroyed. Croesus assumed the oracle meant Persia. He was wrong. Around 547 BC, Croesus launched his invasion. The two armies met, fought to a standstill, and Croesus, believing the campaign season was over, withdrew to his capital city of Sardis to rest and gather reinforcements for the following year. Cyrus did not stop. In a move that stunned the ancient world, Cyrus pursued Croesus into Lydian territory, pressed the attack, and besieged Sardis before the reinforcements could arrive. The city fell within 2 weeks. Croesus was captured. The richest kingdom in the Western world was gone, and Lydia's vast gold reserves now belonged to Persia. But Cyrus was still not finished. His next target was the one city that every ruler of the ancient world had dreamed of taking, and none had ever managed to hold. Babylon, the greatest city on earth, home to the legendary Ishtar Gate, a city of towering temples, hanging gardens, and walls so thick that ancient writers claimed 2 chariots could ride side by side along their tops. It was, by every measure, impregnable. Its ruler, Nabonidus, was deeply unpopular, having offended Babylon's powerful priestly class by neglecting the city's chief god, Marduk, in favor of a moon deity called Sin. The city was restless. Its people were unhappy. And in 539 BC, Cyrus arrived at its gates. Do you think Cyrus earned his reputation as one of history's greatest rulers, or was he simply a brilliant conqueror? Let us know in the comments below. If this documentary is keeping you hooked, hit the like button. It genuinely helps this channel reach more history lovers. What followed was one of the most stunning military operations in ancient history. Persian engineers diverted the Euphrates River, which flowed directly through the city, reducing its water level enough for soldiers to wade through the riverbed and enter Babylon beneath its walls. The city was taken in a single night, but what happened next was perhaps even more extraordinary than the conquest itself. Cyrus did not burn Babylon. He did not loot its temples. He did not massacre its people. He rode into the city and presented himself not as a conqueror, but as a liberator, as the chosen servant of Marduk himself, come to restore proper worship and right governance to the city the god loved. The Babylonians, by many accounts, welcomed him. Among those living under Babylonian rule were thousands of Jewish exiles, descendants of the people forcibly deported from Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar decades earlier. They had spent 2 generations in captivity, forbidden from returning to their homeland. Cyrus freed them. He allowed them to return to Jerusalem, ordered the rebuilding of their temple, and returned the sacred objects Nebuchadnezzar had taken. This act is recorded not just in Persian records, but in the Hebrew Bible itself, in the books of Ezra, Isaiah, and Chronicles. Cyrus is the only non-Jewish figure in the entire Hebrew Bible to be referred to as a Messiah, an anointed one. In Isaiah, God speaks of Cyrus directly, calling him my shepherd, who will carry out divine purpose. This was not an isolated act of generosity. It was consistent with everything Cyrus had done throughout his campaigns. From Persia to Lydia to Babylon, he had governed through respect rather than terror. And the result was an empire whose subjects had genuine reasons to remain loyal. The ancient world had never seen anything like it. In 1879, archaeologists excavating the ruins of Babylon uncovered a small clay cylinder, barely the size of a human hand, covered in ancient cuneiform script. It was the declaration Cyrus had made upon taking Babylon, a document now known as the Cyrus Cylinder. In it, Cyrus proclaimed the freedom of peoples held in Babylon. He declared that he would allow displaced populations to return to their homelands. He stated that all peoples under his rule would be free to worship their own gods without interference. He positioned himself as a ruler who governed by consent rather than conquest. Scholars debate the extent to which this document should be called the world's first human rights charter. The concept of human rights, as we understand it, was not something the ancient world consciously articulated, but the values it expresses, freedom of religion, freedom from arbitrary displacement, governance in the interest of the governed, were genuinely revolutionary for 539 BC. Today, a replica of the Cyrus Cylinder sits in the United Nations headquarters in New York. It is acknowledged as one of the foundational documents in the history of human dignity. A clay cylinder from ancient Babylon, on display at the center of the modern world. By the time Cyrus had completed his major campaigns, the scale of what he had built was simply staggering. The Achaemenid Persian Empire stretched from the Aegean coast of modern Turkey in the west to the edges of modern Pakistan and Afghanistan in the east. It encompassed modern Iran, Iraq, Syria, Israel, Egypt's borders, and vast stretches of Central Asia. It covered approximately 5.5 million square kilometers. It governed somewhere between 35 and 50% of the entire world's population at the time, the highest proportion any single empire has ever controlled in human history before or since. And it had been built in less than 30 years by a man who started as the prince of a vassal state that most of the world had never heard of. The speed and scale of Cyrus's achievement was so extraordinary that later conquerors, Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, Napoleon, would study his life explicitly, attempting to understand how one man had accomplished what armies and dynasties over centuries had failed to do. But empires, no matter how brilliantly built, always outlive their builders. The exact circumstances of Cyrus's death in 530 BC remain a subject of historical debate, with ancient sources offering conflicting accounts. The most widely accepted version, drawn from Greek historians including Herodotus, places his death during a military campaign against a nomadic people of the Central Asian steppes known as the Massagetae, led by their queen, Tomyris. According to Herodotus, after an initial Persian victory in which the queen's son was captured and subsequently died, Tomyris sent Cyrus a message warning him to withdraw. Cyrus pressed forward. The Massagetae regrouped and launched a devastating counterattack. Cyrus was killed in battle. He was approximately 70 years old. His body was returned to Persia and interred in a simple but dignified tomb at Pasargadae, the city he had built as the first capital of his empire. The tomb still stands today in southern Iran, remarkably preserved after 2,500 years. When Alexander the Great conquered Persia 2 centuries later, one of the first things he did was visit Cyrus's tomb. He ordered it restored and protected. He considered Cyrus the greatest ruler who had ever lived. Cyrus the Great died 30 years into his reign, leaving behind an empire that would survive, under his successors, for another 2 centuries, eventually falling to Alexander in 330 BC. But his legacy runs deeper than borders and battle records. The concept that a ruler owes something to the people he governs, that power carries obligation, not just privilege, was not common in 550 BC. It was radical. It was genuinely dangerous to the established order of kings who ruled by divine terror. Cyrus modeled something different. He showed that an empire built on a degree of consent, on respect for diversity, on allowing people to preserve their identities within a larger political structure, could be more stable, more powerful, and more enduring than one built purely on fear. That idea did not die with him. It traveled through the Persian Empire into Greek thought. Greek philosophers who studied Cyrus, particularly Xenophon, who wrote an entire biography called the Cyropaedia, carried his model of leadership into Western political thought. The American founding fathers read Xenophon's account of Cyrus. Thomas Jefferson owned 2 copies of the Cyropaedia. The ideals of religious tolerance, governance by consent, and the protection of subjugated peoples that appear in America's founding documents carry, at least in part, the fingerprints of a Persian king who lived 2,500 years ago. And then there is the Cyrus cylinder, sitting in the United Nations, acknowledged by the modern world as a precursor to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. A shepherd's son from a forgotten corner of the ancient world. A vassal prince who was never supposed to matter, who looked at the world as it was, brutal, hierarchical, built on fear, and decided to build something entirely different. He was not a saint, he was a conqueror. He fought wars and took lives and built his empire through force. But in an age defined by cruelty, he chose repeatedly to govern through something else. That is why we still say his name. That is why his tomb is still standing. And that is why, 25 centuries after his death, a small clay cylinder from ancient Babylon sits at the heart of the institution the modern world built to protect human dignity. Cyrus the Great, the king who conquered the world and then chose not to burn it down. Subscribe to the Knowledge Relic and turn on notifications. Every week we uncover the figures, the empires, and the forgotten moments that shape the world you're living in right now. The next story is already waiting.